for joining us of day 6 of Blue Jay. Natalie Giazzo, Kanawioke Kayakono Nodake. I am Natalie. I come from Oklahoma Cayuga people. In my spare time, I do a lot of language revitalization work. And so as a part of that, I'm going to say a prayer before we start today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to say the prayer. I'm going to say it again in English, and we will move forward. So. Swaguego, Swadosios, Nigai Waka. Dead Wadanahono Ongosawa. Dead Wadanahono Echinoha Owejade. Dead Wadanahono Ha Deweno Rage Onoguatra Ni. Dead Wadanahono Wayaniota. Dead Wadanahono Ode Hadoni. Dead Wadanahono Gadino. Dead Wadanahono ne Onegaonyo. Dead Wadanahono ne Kyoheko. Dead Wadanahono ne Deyowa Wenye. De Etanahono ne Etisont Hadewanoda Kies. Des Wadanahono ne Sadwagia Edeka Kakwakies. De Etanahono ne Etisot Asoheka Ethnida Kies. De Etanahono ne just so dasha. De etanahono kie nio guadage. Hario ageno. Des wadanahono songwayadiso. Danato nagakweni ige akekieda ganahono. Danato. Everyone, we will listen for a little while. The people, we greet each other. We will give thanks to our mother, the earth. And we will give thanks to the weeds and the medicines. We will give thanks to the hanging fruits. And we will give thanks to the trees. We will give thanks to the animals, and we will give thanks to our waters. We will give thanks to our sustenance, and we will give thanks to the stirring winds. We will give thanks to our grandfathers, the thunderers, and we will give thanks to him, our the brother sun. We will give thanks to our grandmother moon, and we will give thanks to the stars. We will give thanks to the 4 heavenly beings, and we will give thanks to him, our creator. That is what I was going to give thanks for. That is all. Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Natalie. I do a lot of things here at Natalie Fund, but this year I'm in charge of Blue Jay. Blue Jay is our community arts culture connection event. We hold it every fall, and wonderful. I'm seeing more people trickle in. This year it looks like an online festival due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We have had a number of wonderful storytellers, whether they were telling stories like traditional stories, or whether they were telling their own stories. We've heard a lot of wonderful things, and you can check out our YouTube playlist, which does have recordings if you are wondering where you might be able to look at some of this. So, no worry. We'll see you there, Larissa. So we also have an event sponsor for the first time. That'll be the Seattle Foundation. Big Masi, big thank you for their help in putting on this event. Today's event will be a listening session. We will be listening to a podcast voiced directly by some of the youth that Na'ilahi works with. This podcast was a partnership between Red Eagle Soaring and Totem Star. Red Eagle Soaring is an organization that is dedicated to engaging Native youth in either things like theater or performing arts, whether that's traditional, whether that's contemporary. And Totem Star is an organization that is best exemplified by their tagline, keeping kids off the streets, in the studio, and on the stage since 2010. So these particular youth discussed their lives, their culture, and their homelands. That is the title of this episode. They actually discussed this from their perspectives, which included an intersectional view of Egyptian, Tlingit, and Ojibwe perspectives. I actually was very lucky to be able to meet these youth and listen to them speak. Their words, every time I hear them, really continue to inspire me. Something that you'll hear during the podcast is the opener. He goes, this is the Unnamed Podcast, because this was actually the first episode back in the day. And what ended up happening was, there wasn't a name, and that part kind of came later after people were talking about it. And the cool thing about this is, too, that the artwork itself was designed by one of the members, I believe, who appears later on. So it's really nice to be able to hear the packaged version of our words. And I will say, I really do enjoy how it's, I don't know, just kind of how it happened, how it was produced, and how it sounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that way it comes through. This is available on our website. Okay. Here we are. This is under what we do, under community programs and current projects. Wavelengths is actually what ended up being the the official name, and this episode is titled Homelands. So what I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to share my sound, I'm going to mute myself, and just let me know in the chat box if it goes ahead.
We are a group of young BIPOC discussing meaningful topics within the intersections of our cultures.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unnamed Podcast. I am Zach. Today's episode, we are talking about our homelands, memories of our homelands. And I'd like to start out with a couple poems. One by a poet named Tawfiq Sayigh, who is a Syrian poet. And there it is, about his alienation and exile abroad. He says, "My feet are torn, and homelessness has worn me out. Park benches have left their marks on my ribs. Policemen followed me with their suspicious looks. I dragged myself from place to place, destitute except for long, day-long memories of a home only yesterday was mine, and except for evening dreams of my dwelling there again." Another poet, he's a Palestinian poet named Mahmoud Darwish, talking about his homeland, Palestine. He says, "Our homeland, that is our homeland, and our homeland is that we be its homeland. It is that we be its plants and birds and its inanimate things. Our homeland is our birth, our ancestors, our children, our grandchildren, our hearts, walking on the thorns of the aspalathus and on the down of the grouse. And our homeland is that we fence its fire and ashes with violets. It is that we be its homeland. It is that we be its homeland. It is a paradise or an ordeal. Both are alike." I feel like the last line is what mostly resonated with me. I guess that, well, today's question was, what is your favorite memory of your land? And for me, as someone who's lived in Egypt for 15 years before coming to Seattle, I've always seen my homeland as, it wasn't perfect, but I felt like everything in it, both the paradise and the ordeals, makes it, I don't know, just like a very special place to my heart. The struggles of the people against tyranny, and the paradise, the gardens, the family, everything being happy. It's kind of like an interesting balance to me. I wonder where you guys come from.
For me, my homeland, I was lucky enough to grow up on my homeland and attend an Ojibwe language immersion school and be relatively immersed in my culture, definitely more than a lot of kids that I knew growing up. I think I took my homeland for granted, if that makes sense. I totally saw it as this thing that would always be there, that I would always have access to. And that is presently not the case. There's a lot of political turmoil in that particular area right now. It's getting better. Things are getting a lot better. I'm right now I'm based geographically in upstate New York on Cayuga homelands. And oddly enough, the Cayugas are not, like, they've been displaced too. So like what's here instead of a majority Cayuga population is Cornell University and like Ithaca College. But I have an adoptive Cayuga, I have these adoptive Cayuga grandparents who we hang out with and do, or pre-COVID, because I'm not about to endanger my elders, but pre-COVID we would hang out with them a lot, share in their ceremonies and share in their protocols and hang out with them all the time and bring them food. We still bring them food, it's just curbside drop off now. But yeah, it's beautiful here. This is probably the prettiest place I've ever lived. It's incredibly frozen right now and very just rolling hills. Where I grew up, it's very flat because apparently a glacier went through there.
We also have Eliza here.
I guess what I consider my homeland now is not the land that I necessarily grew up on. My family was separated from our homelands a couple generations ago due to some relocation efforts by the Federal Indian Bureau Affairs people, pretty much the government, and they were just trying to get people from rural Alaska to move out of rural Alaska so that they could control it. And so my grandma actually moved away from here in Southeast Alaska when she was 17 years old, and my family has kind of been displaced ever since. So yeah, I guess I really wanted to come learn my Tlingit language, and the only place that I could really do that was here in Southeast Alaska. So that is where I am currently at, and that is probably where I will remain for the rest of my life. Just because like I just love it so much, and I just feel like a whole person when I'm here. And like I never knew how much I was connected to this land that I had literally never even stepped foot on like before I was 12 years old, that I could become so connected to it and so intertwined with the people here because they're my people. And I don't know, I've just never experienced a place where I truly felt like I belonged, and I think that that place was here. So now it just feels like home to me, and calling any other place home just doesn't seem right anymore. So
I totally feel what you're saying about like feeling that strong connection and not wanting to leave. Egypt is the only place that I'm going to call my home, but I feel like it is unsafe for me to return. Almost all my family, I only have one sibling here in the US with me. But also culturally, I feel like I'm being disconnected whenever I go back to visit my family. I always see how disconnected I am from the culture, to the point where, sometimes when I'm speaking Arabic, I stutter, which is very sad when it's like when you're losing your language. It's been very hard for me to, try and I guess balance staying attached to my culture while, being, displaced from it, I guess. Yeah, and I was wondering how you guys feel. Do you feel displaced? And if so, how does that manifest?
Yeah, so I think a great example of displacement was actually what happened in like the beginning of the pandemic, because I was here, right? And then of course everyone kind of got sent home from school and so I had to go and live back in Seattle for 6 months. That was really hard for me to hear that, and to hear that I had to be away for so long, even though it meant that I got to be with my friends and my family, which I loved. But being away from this place and being away from my culture for so long, and just being in kind of like a toxic environment in Seattle, because I don't know, there's just a lot of negativity and toxicity around why I don't live there anymore. Being away from like my land for so long was just really sad. I actually cried like the first 3 days of me like finding out that I had to like go and live there for 6 months. Like, I know it sounds bad, like I was being like dramatic and stuff, but honestly I know that it's better for my mental health to just not be there, to not be in the toxicity. There's a huge drug problem in Seattle, and I see that a lot with my friends, with my family members. And when I think of that, I think of all of the bad stuff that comes with it. All I wanted to do in that time was just to come back here and to remain doing what I was doing, and to not be forced to be somewhere else that I don't want to be anymore. A place that I used to call home, but it is no longer my home. And it was really, really depressing. And I kind of just like fell into a depression in the beginning of COVID. And I just woke up every day thinking the same thing, and just feeling so displaced and just out of my element at this point. And I hope that I'm never away from the land for that long again, because it felt so good to be back, and moved back here in August. And it's been amazing ever since.
All your feelings are valid, Eliza. And, we're all here with you. And I'm glad you're back in your home. What about you, Cleo?
I felt displaced on my own land, like to be like back when I was a kid. It wasn't, we weren't in this cultural resurgence we're in right now, like very much. It was kind of considered like cringe and uncool to like want to learn your language and to want to be close to the land and do your customs and do your culture and talk to your elders and stuff like that. And like I felt very disoriented growing up, and pretty invalidated, and like not native enough, basic, which is I think something that a lot of people feel, like whatever your identity is, you kind of feel like you're not enough of it. And it's ridiculous because it's like, well, you were born this way, like
Yeah, what does it mean if you're not enough of your own like culture?
once I left home, I like started to really want to learn my language more, and started to really want to learn my culture more, and keep the parts of myself that I was just ashamed about alive. And I think for many of us, it feels like we're taking it feels easier to do colonial imitations, or to imitate our oppressors, than to do the and so that's part of why I want to go home now, because I'm just watching the people the kids my age who chose to stay and fight these systems, who like chose to stay and dismantle and break cycles and make our homelands, feel like home, feel like places that you can return to and be, like Eliza said earlier, a whole person. So for example, there's this one girl I went to high school with, and her name is Hannah Ori, and she brought back the Wellbriety round dances. It wasn't obviously just her, but she was a huge integral part of bringing back places for Native people, but particularly Anishinaabe, to go and be sober and hang out and have like just like a fun time every weekend. 2019's New Year's Eve, I spent at the Wellbriety round dance that like once it struck midnight or whatever, we all round danced in the new year. And it was so nice to see like so many people that I'd grown up with, and also like elders I'd seen come back to themselves, elders and people who I'd watched when I was little have like problems, like being happy in their culture and being proud of themselves and wearing their regalia and dancing and sharing. I guess going like moving away from displacement and towards returning and resurgence. That's kind of where my tangent went.
Returning and resurgence. I like that. So Eliza, like what do you think about, what do you feel like needs to be done in your community to kind of maintain community connections, I guess?
Well, I think coming from like this area and like being around this area in particular, I think that my community is doing a very good job at cultural resurgence. Yeah, the other day we just celebrated Elizabeth Proutovich Day, and Elizabeth Proutovich was a Tlingit woman. She was able to advocate for an anti-discrimination law and act that was passed here in Alaska 20 years before it was like anywhere else in the country. And I think that that is really powerful. So I think that it's just a testament to who we are as Indigenous people of this land, and that we're very resilient, and that we will fight for our culture, and we have fought for our culture. And I think that's amazing, because everything that we have right now is because of that resiliency and because we fought to have it. The things that we have right now, we have because we had to fight to have them. And I think that it's beautiful seeing like our languages come come together, and we have more programs now that are actually teaching Indigenous students how to be teachers, so that we have more language teachers, and so that we can support our language revitalization efforts. My community, they're doing a great job at cultural resurgence right now, and I cannot wait to see what the future holds for us, because we're doing so good now, and I'm sure that we will be here for another 10,000 years.
I'm excited. You have questions from the audience? Oh, a specific favorite memory. I'll share a specific favorite memory. When I was in eighth and ninth grade, so in Egypt, the schools don't really teach much. You have to get most of your education from private tutors, which is like normal, usually like people in the US who are struggling get private tutors, but in Egypt everyone gets them because school doesn't teach you. And so one thing that me and my friends would do is, we had to go to school so that we be marked as present so that we don't fail. We would throw our bags at the third floor windows so that we throw them outside of the school, and then we go down, we jump a barbed wired fence to skip school and go play PlayStation at a PlayStation cafe nearby. We'd wait until we play until school is over, go to our private lessons. So those were definitely fun times. I never told my dad, so if he listens to this podcast, he probably won't be so happy with me, but that was a long time ago. So yeah. One of my favorite memories, yeah. What about y'all?
My actual like number one favorite memory of my homelands is a secret. So my second favorite memory from my homelands is literally any time that we would go home for Big Drum, because it was just like Big Drum or we had ceremonies in Mille Lacs a couple of times, but we would go home to Nadawash, which is where my family is mostly from, Nadawash and White Earth.
Hmm.
And I just remember like waking up at what seemed like an ungodly early hour as a small child and like seeing the way that the sun would reflect on the trees and the snow and the buildings, and it just like it was so pretty. It was like this painting, and it just kind of like haunts my dreams with how beautiful it was. And um but then a funny favorite memory is during ceremonies we would all sleep on the floor of the gym, like in sleeping bags, and we were little, so that's my caveat. We were very small, and one of the big drummers was asleep across the way, and he just started farting so loud in his sleep. It like vibrated the floor, and my little brother sat up and like bolt upright and was just like, having this, and he was just like, "It's an earthquake," and it was so funny. I miss like during ceremonies, like 30 to 40 people sleeping on the floor together and like waking up for breakfast and elders eating first.
Let's see. My favorite memory of my land, the day like started off with like I had Northwest Coast like art and design. So like I don't know if y'all know what that is, but it's kind of like form line, and it's like our traditional art of like the Northwest Coast area, which I thought was really cool because it's not just in Southeast Alaska, also in like Washington. It's really interesting to me just because we have like a lot of the same cultural practices. None of our languages are related at all. I just thought that was really interesting. My form line teacher, he's also a carver, and his name is Wayne Price. And in my form line class, he announced to us that we were going to go out on the dugout, which means like the canoe. We went out on the canoe. We all met up at like this beach nearby the school, and we all got in the canoe and we got to like go paddle around for like a couple hours, and we had lunch on the beach. And I don't know, it was just a great experience because we were just like all like rowing in like sync, and it was so beautiful, and my arms were really tired, but it was so beautiful. And I just remember like a feeling of like just like pure like happiness and joy, and it was kind of like just euphoric to like look at the land and like be there in the water, and to know that like my ancestors were probably like rowing in the same water like not that long ago. And it kind of just like brought me like a little bit of like comfort and joy, just a lot of peace. And then later that day, actually, our Native and Rural Student Center, which I now work for, our Native and Rural Student Center had a event called Gathering of the Drums. Everybody comes to in like the community, and we all gather up. My school has a pavilion, so we all gathered up and we met up at the pavilion, and everybody like brought their own hand drum, and it was just like everyone was sharing songs and telling stories. And where my school is at geographically, it's like really, it's like down the street from the glacier, so you can actually see the view of the glacier and the mountains from where my school stands. So we were just like looking at the glacier and like telling stories, singing songs with each other. One of probably my happiest moments being here. And like that's kind of when I realized that I just needed to be here for forever.
Where I'm from, you could like meet a person for the first time and they can jump in front of a bullet for you if if they like you from the first time they see you. Before the pandemic, I was living in an apartment, and someone was like moving out of like the apartment in front of us, and he said, "Hey, do you want like some of these things?" And I was like, "Sure." And then we were talking, and then I found out that he was from Egypt, that he's from a town close to mine, and we literally out. We spent the rest of the day together, and we got each other's numbers, and now we hang out regularly. If it was from like first time we ever met, and then we're like already like best friends basically. And that's something that I haven't noticed in the US. I feel like culturally, but generally, I feel like people are much more colder. What do y'all think?
My parents moved here and it was like 6 months before they heard another person laugh. It was nobody joked here until we came here and introduced them to comedy. It was like the just kidding. I mean, like not kidding. Um, very, very, very uptight ivory tower vibes in certain areas. But yeah, like I have a huge family. My my dad's dad is one of 13 kids, and all of those kids had kids, and all of their kids had kids. And that whole clan is incredibly insular, but insular in the way where when we meet people, we totally absorb them into our clan. And they get absorbed into our crew. But in general, people from my family and from my homelands are hilarious and intense. So like today I was kind of like cleaning and I was thinking about there's this one native writer and he's like something about him inspires rage in his peers and it's adorable to watch. Like they're constantly like, your views are whack, you are ridiculous, everything you say is wrong, and they're all friends. Like they just do that, they're just riffing on this dude constantly. And like that's, in my opinion, like sovereignty. Like if somebody is like, we have difference of opinions and difference of vibes and we're also just like teasing someone, and you know, corrective teasing is a thing. And it's just like, so yeah, like corrective teasing is a thing, corrective humor is a thing.
Humor.
Yeah,
It's
humor.
very different amongst cultures.
Yeah.
A lot of humor where I'm from is physical. I mean, in general, we're a very physical culture. I didn't understand the concept of personal space. Obviously, 100% I respect it, you know, that now that I know what it is. But before I came here, I didn't know what it was because everyone is just so close. Like one day when I was in high school, I literally like came up from behind like a friend of mine and I hugged them without asking them. Obviously, you know, I didn't know better. You know, it was just a way of like me showing, you know, that I love them. And then they were like, chill, personal space. Don't come up in my space. Like I felt very hurt. And because I didn't know what personal space was. I had to Google it. And I was like, oh, like in Egypt, you know, it's like there's no such thing as, you know, obviously if you tell someone to back off, they will, but like it's not assumed, you know what I'm saying? You know, everyone's all over each other. That's how we live. And now I am not, you know, you know, I have some anxiety issues, okay? Yeah, I feel like the longer I'm in this country, the more I feel introverted in a way. Like the person I was 5 years ago is not the person I am right now. And it's not just because I'm 5 years older. Do you feel like people have been accustomed to being selfish, or like the system has turned people selfish? A friend of mine in Egypt, you know, say only, you know, 50 pounds in his pocket, that's like, you know, a few dollars, and that's all the money that we have, and we're both hungry, you know, that's all he has, he'll split it between us. But I feel like a lot of relationships here are more um individualistic, at least like from an outsider's perspective, or like someone who's lived here for a short amount of time. What do y'all feel? What do y'all think?
Yeah, so I definitely can see the differences, but just like in our own like indigenous community in Seattle, it's very different. The overall relationships in Seattle because I don't know, I feel like our Indigenous communities, we do think in like a communal mindset in like a way, like most people I would say they're like, oh yes, I just want to like serve my community, I just want to be involved in my community, I just want to give back, and that's what is on a lot of Indigenous people's minds. But I think that society and just like the Western way of thinking and like how colonization has brought us to this point in society where we do think really like individualist. It's better if you're just like by yourself and everything that you do is to benefit yourself and you're not really like thinking about other people. And although like that can work for some people, it's just like not realistic, not sustainable thinking in
Yes.
that individualistic way. And I don't see it like lasting a very long time or you having a very fulfilling life if you just think that way all of the time. But yeah, I feel like when I'm at like events and it's just like the Indigenous community, it definitely doesn't feel like an individualistic society, and it does feel like we're all kind of interconnected in some way and we are all family, and you get to be like treated as family, you know. And it is very different. And if you go to an Indigenous event versus just going just regular a Seattle just like
Mm.
community event and things like that. So yeah, I think we do definitely see the difference.
I think like maintaining connections with a community makes you like less of an individualistic person because you feel like other members in your community make you better. You can't succeed on your own, but you need the help of others in your community to rise up. No one is left behind. I feel like maintaining your culture is crucial when it comes to your community's survival and maintaining connections. There's this rapper named Brother Ali. He's this white albino Muslim rapper, and he has a song called Before They Called You White. And he was talking about how before there was a label for white people, it was a bunch of Europeans from different cultures, Irish, Dutch, English, who basically decided to erase their cultural identity and become individualistic, and so it you lose connection to where you're from. Yeah, he basically like made this deduction or like theory about like how like they sacrificed their cultural roots so that they could become colonizers. But once you erase your culture just to fit in, you lose that sense of community.
The question is, what would you tell an urban kid who feels lonely and disconnected from culture right now? What is the first step they should take for reconnection?
I actually would like to start with that one. I don't fully identify as an urban kid. I'm rural, half rural. It's weird. What I would tell any kid, urban or otherwise, who feels lonely and disconnected from culture right now is your first step should always be to listen. That individualism only really thrives when those of us kind of get assimilated into this idea that once you know one thing, you know it all. Once you know one thing, you know everything. Listening is the first step to filling that absence, because the more you listen to an elder or a community leader or members of your community who are more connected than you or who may have access to resources that you don't have access to, like the more you listen to them, the more you're having a relationship with someone. And I have attention disorder, so I have this exercise that I do whenever I listen or whenever I want to listen but I can't, which is that like when someone's talking and I really want to like hear what they're saying, I like breathe while they're talking. I'll take like one breath in and hold it Like I'll take one breath in and count while listening to them, and then hold it while listening to them, and then exhale while listening to them. And that way, like I'm bringing my body in tune with like their voice or their words, like integrating that. So that's literally my only thing that I would tell. Individualism and colonialism is going to keep trying to come for you, and you have to keep finding ways to disrupt it. You have to keep finding ways to tell it to like get away from you, and you have to really push aside your ego. If you believe in the ego, like you have to push aside what they make you internalize. That you have to push aside, because even thinking that you're not enough of whatever you are, that is like egoic. Like you are already here, so therefore you are already enough of this thing. You already have the tools that you need to start reconnecting. Anybody can do it if you come at it from a place of humility and listening and being sure of yourself. Like in my language, our word for humility translates to have a high self-esteem. So if you have a high self-esteem, you're going to be able to listen easier, because you're not going to be talking so much trying to justify your place in this world. Your place is already justified. Your presence is already justified. Like it's your turn to just breathe.
I think what we were talking about earlier, Cleo, about what does it mean to be disconnected from your culture? Like, doesn't make sense. No one defines it for you. The most important thing is to acknowledge that this is part of who you are. Like me being Egyptian, this is part of who I am, no matter what anyone tells me. And the only thing or the only person that can say otherwise is me, or you in your case. The thing is, me leaving the culture I grew up in at age 15, I still had a few more years for me to fully learn my culture and appreciate my culture. I always try and maintain connections with my friends and family in Egypt, talking in Arabic, listening to old Arabic music that I used to listen to as a kid and my parents used to listen to. In my art, I started incorporating more elements of my culture, like sampling these songs, these Egyptian songs, into my music. But yeah, just maintaining connection with my family, maintaining my relationships with the people here that I've met that are also, away from their homeland, and kind of thinking about and meditating about our cultures, ruminating about our cultures, like what we're doing right now.
I think that one of the most important things that you can do if you are that kid who is, I don't know, I feel like we've all been that kid at some point. I was that kid. I was like that urban kid who didn't grow up anywhere near my my homelands. I didn't have those traditions or language. And I could relate with other people, but it's like hard not having like that connection. But I guess my best advice would be, it's like what Cleo said, is like knowing what you are and where you belong in the world. And I think that that's really important to recognize and know. A lot of time I feel like, especially in like urban settings, people are always like telling us like what we are, and like, oh, I'm Native. They're like, oh, no, you're not. I'm like, yeah, I am. So I guess it would just be like to not let anyone tell you who you are. Just to remember, like, you got to be true to yourself first. Try to be proactive and like reach out. You don't have to move to another state to try to get reconnected if you don't want to. There's always people who will give you information, and there's always connections that can be made wherever you are and wherever you may be. And I think that one of the most important things is to just like be proactive about it. Unfortunately, like getting involved in the culture and community, it doesn't just fall in your lap. You have to put in a little bit of an effort, and it sucks, but that's just the way that it is. The worst thing that you could possibly do is nothing. As long as you put in any type of effort and you're proactive, even just a little bit, it can really pay off. But yeah, I think just reaching out and being productive and remembering who you are and staying true to yourself. That's probably the best advice that I could have given myself a couple years ago. So.
This was the first episode of the Unnamed Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we will see you next time with another episode of Unnamed Podcast.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us it's not the Unnamed Podcast anymore, right? It's called Wavelengths. That is on our website, as I stated before. Wow, it's always just so good to hear their words. I always get a little happy when I think about it. We're 15 minutes until 2, so I'm going to go ahead and give you all 15 minutes back to think, to reflect, to maybe listen again if you heard something that you want to hear again. I hope you all have a wonderful week, wonderful night, wonderful weekend, and wonderful rest of your year. Doing Blue Jay has been a wonderful experience, so thank you, Natalie Fund, for having us all come together and for allowing me to be in charge of it. And I really hope to see you all next year. Have a good one.